Call tonight's meeting to order. Kathleen Allen.
Here.
Brian Chetney. Are you there, Brian? Tom Chapa.
I'm here. I had to unmute.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Tom Chapa. Heather Del Conte.
Here.
Brandon Legault.
Here.
Linda Serino. Linda.
Here.
Sam Tripp.
Here.
And Tom Chapa. He was with us. Should I go on?
He's showing on the screen, so he should be here.
Okay. Next, or on the agenda, we're going to move right to the superintendent's report. So I'm going to hand it right over to Dr. Ui.
Hi, everybody. Jamie's going to help me with some technology. I have 4 areas that I want to talk about. I'm going to start with budget, then we're going to move into food service, and then we're going to move into continuity of instruction. And so Jamie's going to bring up the PowerPoint for today. So I emailed it to you previously, but you'll be able to see it here as well. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Are we set?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So this is our path has changed slightly since the last meeting. As I suggested at our last meeting, we were anticipating the legislative run, which actually came in as the second governor's run with legislative approval, which is the slide that you're seeing now. So this gives each of the aid lines on the left column, and then the next column is the original governor's proposed aid run, which was issued on January 21st, which were the numbers that we were looking at our last meeting. Since then, on March 31st, the governor has issued what's called the post-corona governor's proposed aid, and it has some changes in it. And sadly and concerningly, as anticipated, this is the first time in decades that the legislative, what would previously have been called the legislative run, came in lower than the original governor's run. And for those of you that have been watching any of the governor's press conferences or other statements, or have read any of the budgets that have been released or any of the guidance documents, will know that he's been talking about a pretty significant hit to public education for the last month. And that unfortunately came true with the release of this number. You'll see that the original governor's proposed aid, released on January 21st at the bottom of the second column, was $34,850,060. The newest aid run released by the governor and approved by the legislature came in $1.2 million less than the original aid number that he gave us, at $33,641,703, largely impacted by the current state of affairs across the world. If you're interested, you can look down the far right-hand column and see the pluses and minuses related to particular aid. You'll see an increase in transportation aid, and really other than that, and a flat aid on high cost excess cost, everything else was a reduction, most significantly at foundation aid at $1.149 million. The next slide is the budgeted revenue. So these are the areas of revenue, and this is just revenue now. We're just talking about revenue. We have property taxes, pilot, state aid, other revenues such as Medicare, BOCES reimbursements, things like that, and then and then a box that you'll see that it's empty for the application of reserves or fund balance, something that I've always consistently resisted And in most budget years, we did not use reserves and fund balance. Rather, we elected to use a revenue-based budget. And we may or may not be able to do that again this year. The second column shows the 19-20 budget that we're currently in. And you can see there are a couple of very significant changes. The first is in the area of property tax. You can see that we have an increase of $17.7 million in property tax revenue, and that's because, as you know, we had to put 9 Mile 1 and 2 nuclear power on the tax rolls, which generated that additional $17.7 million in taxes. However, it's largely offset in the next row, which is pilots. When they came onto the tax rolls, they came off the pilot. So you see a significant reduction in our pilots, 16.5 million, in fact, reduction in pilots, largely attributable to taking 9 Mile 1 and 2 off our pilot revenue and putting it onto property tax. The next is state aid. You can see that the reduction in state aid from what we received last year, the increase from last year to this year. This is a number that we talked about over the last few months when the governor lumped all the aids together and he called them, he referred to them all as foundation aid, and we all thought that, oh, maybe we got $5 or $6 million. Once we pulled that all apart, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, the legislature overruled that practice. Our actual increase in state aid is $723,795. Other revenues, again, these come in the form of Medicaid reimbursements, BOCES reimbursements, other things like that. We actually anticipate to be down about $276,000. So if you look at our total budgeted revenue of our current budget, which is $86,003,427.4, and the 2021 budget of just revenue, which is $87,667,644, that's an increase of $1.6 million, which is a 1.9% increase over this year. But it's important to point out here, because this is where it gets tricky, that a few weeks ago when we were looking at a simple rollover budget, because we knew that the money was going to be very tight, we anticipated this happening. We looked at a rollover budget which just based on obligations to collective bargaining, increased in contracts, other costs that we have no control over. We were looking at a 3.7% increase. So 1.9 sounds good on the surface, but it will be very challenging for us. Okay. So this is what we know. State aid support for schools, we know now, has been reduced in the state by $1.1 billion, which the governor says has been fully offset by the federal CARES restoration money. There's a bucket of money called the federal CARES restoration money, which is supposed to be the great equalizer, and it may be. But we don't know that yet. We're not sure, because the guidelines on the timing and the use of this federal bucket of money has not been clear. And we don't have any real guidance on that. I have reached out to some other districts, not only in our region and the state, and there are districts who have their legal, and I will forward a copy to Tom Buckle tomorrow, of resolutions by boards to create a new policy that would allow for the use of these federal monies to offset the other gaps in your budget. Because our concern is that these federal monies will come with handcuffs similar to other federal money, which is sort of, spend to get, and very, very heavily regulated, which would be very challenging for us. If the federal CARES restoration money doesn't fully backfill the gaps that are created by the $1.1 billion reduction in school aid, then we are in very serious trouble, as are most districts. So again, there's another problem. the governor has indicated, and he has not fully committed to, the idea that he could file a waiver with the New York State Legislature to take back more aid if the state continues to have the revenue shortfalls that he has indicated that they have now, based on the high cost expenditures related to health care and other matters related to the coronavirus. If he does that, that would be devastating for all school districts, including ours. State aid could be further diminished, not only between now and the end of the 1920 school year, but between July 1 and December 31st of our next school year. So we could, in essence, build a budget, and the governor could ask for a waiver through the state legislature and pull money back.
Jean, I have a question.
Yes.
Can they pull the money back on building projects?
No, that's separate money. That would because that's largely borrowing, but this would be school aid money in all the categories that I described in the previous slides. So that's separate and distinct, Linda. She can't see me, can she?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can't see any of you, but you can see me.
But I have a question to kind of piggyback on what Linda's saying. When the capital project was approved, we only pay so much per dollar, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything that can the state pull that back, what they've promised us on that capital project, or is that set in stone?
The state is committed to our aid on the capital project, and the governor has not indicated that he plans to or intends to pull back on any capital improvement money. He's talking about regular school aid. So I guess the short answer is we've had no indication that he's thinking about that or intends to do that. And in fact, I don't think he can, because you already start to do your bonding, you go out to bids, there are legal obligations. There are so many legal obligations tied to a capital project, particularly one that's already been approved by the voters, for him to tamper in that.
Thank you. I just didn't want the rug to be pulled out from underneath us on it.
No, thanks for planting that seed of concern. That will keep me up tonight. Because I hadn't worried about that until this minute, but I don't think there's any indication. I watch him every day. I read all his briefs, and I don't see that happening. So this shows the 3 periods of possible aid takeback. The first one, which would be catastrophic, would be April 1st through April 30th. We've gotten no indication that there would be any current aid pulled back. The next is May 1st through June 30th, the current year. Again, fingers crossed. But the most devastating is if we build a very, very challenging budget with reflecting the gap that we currently have in our revenue, that he could turn around and file a waiver and ask the legislature for permission to pull some of our aid back. I don't know what we would do. If that were to happen, if we built a budget and that budget was adopted by the board, and whether or not it is approved by the voters or not, that's not been determined yet. When exactly the board vote would be, and if in fact there would be a vote on a school budget that stays under the cap. It hasn't been announced. If he pulls money back then, the only way to provide funds back to New York State would be through staff cuts. So I'm only saying that so that it's out there, that's a possibility. I think it's a long shot, but I think it's responsible for me to point that out to you. There's no way to predict or budget for what could theoretically happen. There's no way to plan for that.
So, Dean, I have a couple questions.
What kind of aid he might ask for, and he understands how devastating that would be to schools. I find it highly unlikely that he would ever do something like that, but he has the right to ask.
Dean, I have a couple questions.
Yes.
So, do we have, or can you have Nancy get us some information on the current open positions that are out there? In relation to the budget and us filling those positions?
Yeah, what we can do a couple of things. We can, once we get there, we can not only provide, I think what you're asking is who's retiring or leaving us.
Yes, and I didn't know if we had open positions throughout this year that we have or have not filled yet.
No, we don't, I don't think, Heidi could jump into that, but we don't typically hold on to open positions because there typically is language in collective bargaining agreements. They don't let us just hold on to them. We either have to eliminate the position or fill it. But what we did start to generate already is a list of anticipated retirees, some of whom have already submitted their retirements for approval by the board, and some others that we're anticipating. In fact, I'm looking at that list now. It's not as significant as a list as might help us, but that would be the first line of attack. Would be attrition. Because certainly we don't want to. We're going to try to do as little harm as possible.
Right. So another question I had is in the last meeting we talked a lot about the options in terms of moving the kids around and those types of things. I'm interested to see where we're at and how we've been doing with that. But it kind of sparked a question. When we went through the capital project, we must have at that point in time anticipated that there was going to be some movement and some other things that may have had to happen. Was any of that budgeted into the capital project in terms of shutting the schools down or moving students around and those types of things? Because we had talked about, what it would cost to put Layton back to the way it was. We had talked about redistricting. We talked about all those things, but those were going to impact our current budget. Were any of those, can any of those, that's the other question, be built into the capital project versus us trying to figure out what to do with that going forward, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there, but the short answer is we've always been looking at our trends for enrollment. I've always been looking at the possibility of repurposing further. We've talked about that many times. But the idea of closing a school or repurposing a school never was aligned with selling a building. So that there was never any long-term plan for selling a school. And we always knew that, and I've reported that to the board many times, the only way to continue to have a school building be useful relative to state aid is to continue instructional programs within that building specific. And
yeah,
so,
I wasn't suggesting the sell of a building. What I was suggesting is if we repurposed Layton or whatever, and we didn't need as many teachers, instead of the layoffs, it could possibly reduce staffing at that point, right?
yes, okay, I understand better. I'm glad you asked that question. I'm not prepared to share the figures with you tonight, but that will be at the next meeting when we start laying out some possible ways to shrink this gap that I haven't quite gotten to yet. I've alluded to it, but you're exactly right. By doing some further repurposing, there is a way to more organically save dollars related to staff. Because as you can imagine, we currently have 5 schools, and you have every grade level at every school, and each of those schools has a particular boundary. So so that causes some inequity from school to school related to class size. For example, you might have within the boundary of Riley Elementary School at 3rd grade, within our class size limit, you might have class sizes of 22 and 23. Yet in the boundary of Fitchuk Park at 3rd grade, you might have, and I'm making these numbers up for demonstration purposes, you might have a 3rd grade a 3rd grade section with 18 or 19. So there's some inequity. the fewer schools you have, the greater control because you have fewer boundaries to equalize class size better. So that's a more organic way to be able to theoretically reduce sections of teachers without increasing your class size limit, whatever it is that you establish that to be.
Very
It
good.
also might organically provide opportunities to reduce some superfluous staff, some redundancy in staff more organically. For example, a music teacher or an art teacher or a clerical person, or the number of custodial support that you might need in a building, depending on its usage. And
Now-
I will spell that out for you
Dean,
when we look at our options for reducing the gap that we're going to start attacking tomorrow after this presentation.
Dean,
Yep.
I know that the question was directed towards the possibility of closing a school. However, I know there's some other ideas out there that I think the board would like to hear before, maybe have some presentations from those people so that we can hear their plan that they've developed and ask pertinent questions before.
Yeah, Linda, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think I know what you're talking about, which is really a separate and distinct conversation that we started having before this all started. And that is the best way to, the best educational and economic way to provide swing space for the middle school. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. As I indicated to the board probably 6 weeks ago now, there was Kathleen had asked us to look at some other options, and Sam did as well. And so I asked Mary Beth and Heidi and Pat Wallace to come together and to tell me exactly what moving 8th grade to the middle school would look like. What exactly would it look like? What would it require? What would the impact on learning be? What would the impact on size? They have started that work. I checked in with Heidi this week about that. They have not presented any findings to me, although I know that they've done that work. That work has not been completed as far as I know, and it hasn't been vetted through me yet. But
I think
it's kind of been on the back burner because it's not really relative to this budget crisis that we're in. But it is something that you're going to have to make a decision on at some point.
Right. I'm just requesting because we are talking about that building, is to put it out there that, there's some good ideas out there since the last time we met. And as a board member and talking to some of the other board members, we would like them to present it to us so that we can.
Yeah.
It's open.
Well, I haven't even heard them yet, Linda, so I don't know whether they're good ideas or not good ideas. As a superintendent, that committee has not presented those findings to me yet, so I'm not sure. And I didn't ask them to make a recommendation. I asked them to provide me with the facts. What would it look like? What are the real facts? And certainly we will present those to you. But you can imagine that COVID-19 coupled with and caused the budget crisis that we're now in that's caused by COVID-19 has kind of pushed that off to the side, because that conversation came up because I was trying to set the table for you before I leave about how to repurpose, how to offset 7th or 8th grade in the fall of 2021. So yes, we will get there and you will get those presentations, but
Great.
I haven't heard them yet.
Yeah, that's all.
Great, thank you.
Dean, can I ask a quick question budget-wise?
Sure.
Am I understanding you to say that if we don't every year get a 3 or 3.5% raise in state aid, we can't keep up with our contractual obligations?
No, that 3 point that let me go back to that slide.
3.7.
Yeah, that 3.7% increase that I referred to would be the cost of rolling over our budget. Collective bargaining commitments would be one piece of that. But when I say contracts, don't think that I'm always talking about collective bargaining agreements. I'm talking about contracts with other agencies. I'm talking about high-cost placements for students with disabilities. I'm talking about increase in fuel costs, those sorts of things.
But is that unique to this year? I guess because you showed that there is in fact an increase in state aid, but it's not enough to meet the. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on why we're in a budget crisis and we actually have more money. It's because the contract, our obligations are bigger than what we're getting additionally, correct?
That's part of it, yes.
And is that unique to this year, or is that every year we're in that position?
Well, every year, a district our size with 4 collective bargaining groups is challenging, but it's not really, I mean, every district is challenged. Let's face it, the highest cost in any budget for any public school district is people. The cost of your employees is your biggest cost. And that goes to not only salaries, but certainly healthcare costs, unemployment, funding reserves for that. All of those sorts of things are very, very expensive. The cost of healthcare alone is staggering. We have a significant piece of our budget in the area of personnel. It's a heavy lift. Yeah.
And if I may add, we did have some high increases this year. One was in legal cost. Another one was in students coming up from pre-K into kindergarten that needed one-to-one aides and nursing. So our special education costs have gone up tremendously. So those are the other 2 things that have affected the budget for this year that we don't have any control over.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I guess one of our focus has always been on long-term, looking ahead, and it seems like now we're in a position where we're back, like staring at the wall right in front of us. And I just was curious if these are trends or if this is just something unique to this budget season.
This is, remember, never before in my 20 years in ed leadership have I ever seen a legislative budget come in lower than the governor. I've never seen the governor talk about mid-year takebacks. I've never seen anything like this. So it's not surprising to me that we have a budget gap. And that budget gap exists in every district in our county and across the state, I believe. I know what some of the numbers are in the adjoining districts. The gaps are smaller than ours, and some, well, they're all smaller than ours. But some are close. Some of the other larger districts have gaps that are similar to ours, wholly created by state aid. Okay. Some other unknowns, as I indicated before, revenue reduction plan timeline. We don't know if he will do it. We don't know if he will do it, when he'll do it. And that big question about the federal restoration floor, we don't know about the timing and payment options on that money that is designed to equalize this. The other thing that we still are not sure of, and that I indicated a little bit earlier, is the form and date of a budget vote and board election. Right now, it's scheduled in the last executive order. Public schools must adopt their budget within 10 days after April 30th. So for us, that would look like the board would adopt our budget on May 19th, and that there must be a public vote currently, although there has been some talk of no public vote because of social distancing in public schools, as long as that school did not build a budget that exceeded the tax cap. But should we have a budget vote, budget vote would likely be on June 2nd. So that gives us a little more time to grapple with the problems that have been created because of COVID-19. you just have to pardon me because I'm going back and forth between about 3 different pads of paper. So next is from the legislature. These are some things that came out of the last legislative cycle. They rejected the proposal to consolidate aid. That's the way that the governor had rolled out that first state aid run, where he put everything in foundation aid and it made it look like we got a lot more money. The legislature said, no, we're going back to the way that we used to do that. And the second run indicates that. The second is that that's a good thing for us. The second one is the rejected additional community school set aside, which is not aid that we received in the past, but we see that as a good thing. It's a complicating factor. And the third is rejected adjusting transportation and building aid formula, which wouldn't have been good for us in this particular scenario either. So the hard work that we're facing starting tomorrow is that we are working to cut approximately $1.6 million from the 2021 budget. We have been advised not only by the region, all chief school officers in the city, as well as across New York State, and further advised by New York State Association of School Business Administrators, the New York State Council of School Superintendents, and the New York State School Boards Association to not adopt a budget until after April 30th, 2020, because of all of these unknowns. So that date that I gave you is not set in stone because there are so many things that are happening, and it literally changes by the day. So we'll be adopting the budget much later than ever before. We'll be approving or asking for approval or getting approval on a budget later than ever before. And I know that $1.6 million sounds daunting, and it is. But remember that the budget of 2016, we had a $5.6 million gap. $5.6 million, that was devastating. And 1.6 is going to hurt. We're going to look at a variety of scenarios to do that. I'll make some recommendations to the board, and you'll have an opportunity to have workshops like this and talk about those options and get to a place where we feel that we're comfortable. Any additional questions on budget?
Can you hear me now, Dean?
What was that, Tom?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I had to jump out. It was not working with my thing, so I had to jump out, jump back in. My concern about, or my question is relative to the pilots and what we have considering now that 9 Mile's back on the books, and if we go into negotiations, or depending on what happens with those negotiations, we're considering utilizing that money, though that may be a give back depending upon the results of those negotiations, correct?
Once we put the 9 Mile 1 and 2 plants back on the tax rolls, that's where it stays for the 2021 budget. So moving forward, that alters negotiations with 9 Mile 1 and 2. There's no going back now.
Right. Okay. All right. I just want to know, because it's like we're considering that revenue, and that revenue relative to what we got from them from the pilot situation prior to this is more, correct?
Yeah. We're doing a little bit better having them on the tax rolls than we would having a pilot agreement. Theoretically.
Right. We don't know.
We believe so.
Right.
But remember, there will be a bit of an ouch in 3 years relative to state aid because we don't have a pilot with them.
Right.
So it's a short-term gain, and there will be a hiccup in 2023.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Nancy, a while back, we saw a sheet of where all of our people that have pilots within the district. Who determines what those pilots are, and is there can we work with those people that do those pilots that maybe we can get a little more? I mean, because there's I just remember that there was some funky stuff with those pilots that they're sometimes grandfathered in, and these organizations, these companies have these pilots forever. who sets those pilots? Because we have nothing to do with that. We do with the plants, but not with any other pilot, correct?
Nancy, want to jump in to that?
Yep, Kathleen, and that's the IDA. They do the pilots. They negotiate the pilots with the new companies, or if they have an add-on to a building or whatever. We are invited to hearings on the pilot, but really, we really don't have a lot of input into those at all.
Because I'm just thinking, I mean, if you're, maybe to cover some of that shortfall, if there was some way that we could get the IDA to help us out a little bit with some of these pilots, I mean, it's just a thought.
What it would require is for us to renegotiate a pilot. So you'd have to have both parties interested in renegotiating a pilot that's already been approved, not only by the parties, but the IDA. I think would be highly unlikely.
But the district doesn't negotiate all of those pilots.
We don't negotiate any of them.
No,
Right.
we're able to listen in most cases.
Right, but we have no say.
I think the only difference is going forward with our relationship with the IDA, or just, and unfortunately, I think it's a political aspect of things, is you have to be pressure upon them not to give these pilots the way they do. Some of them, and we won't speak to specifically who they are, should be paying $200,000+ and are paying, $30,000 in terms of actual payments, and they go on forever. And I think we can't do anything with what's behind us or where we are right now, but looking forward, it would be in our best interest to have those discussions.
Right, thank you, Tom, because that's exactly what I was thinking, is going forward how, but thank you for the specifics of that. I mean, that's a huge gap for a company not to be paying over $200,000 and we only get 30.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
There are some players in our community that have pilots on their properties, and they're paying less on a business than some of the higher end homeowners are paying on their homes. That's devastating to everybody.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. Are you ready for the next part?
Wait, Dean, I have one more question. You mentioned higher legal bills this past year. I'm sure that has to do with a lot of legal things surrounding negotiations, but do you anticipate having to budget larger legal bill, accounting for larger legal bills as well moving forward, because there may be pushback, et cetera?
Yes, we anticipate, and we already have budgeted a significantly larger amount for legal, because right now we have a couple contracts going. We have our in-house counsel now, which I do think is a good thing. He's been tremendous. Always available, always responsive, always thoughtful in his response. Very good. But we still also have a contract with bond, but we've gotten rid of the monthly stipend portion. But we have had some high costs now, because we also have a contract with Ferrara, so that Joe Shields can be our lead in the new negotiations. So, but in order to be safe, we have to budget to make sure that we can pay those invoices as they come in. We have made a change, as you know, moving forward away from Cayuga Onondaga BOCES for our labor relations folks. Ryan Hatch, we've moved away from him. We have a few things that we're tying up that he's still representing us on. One particular grievance matter that is in arbitration, and then we're switching over to legal representation for collective bargaining, grievances, things like that, through OCM BOCES, and we think that will be a better service and something we're just more comfortable with. So we have our hand in a couple different pots related to expertise in terms of school law, but I do think that we're well covered. I will be asking Heidi to do a presentation in executive session about a particular personnel matter at the next meeting, and ask the board to give some guidance or approval to how to move forward with a particular situation that I shouldn't say any more about regarding an employee. Okay. All right. On to something a little more positive. I wanted to give you a brief. I hope the board is appreciative of all the robocalls and emails and things. I've made sure that the board receives everything that parents or staff get. Every robocall, every email, anything that's sent out remotely through email, through robo, through text also goes to the board. Keep you in the loop of how things are unfolding and how we're trying to communicate with parents. Again, the feedback has been so positive from parents, not only at feeding sites, but through email and phone calls and text, and from staff. But let's talk about food service just for a minute. We are moving to less pre-prepared food and more homemade foods, and that started today. You got the expansive robocall last year where we had to change our food production and distribution dates because of food supply issues. Because as you can imagine, some of those prepackaged food needs that we need to generate those breakfasts and lunches are in such high demand from not only every school district in the state, but in some cases, for example, Smuckers, every school district in the country are asking for those same pre-prepared meals and meal components. That created a little hiccup for Matt last week. He's regrouped and has redesigned our food distribution and production plan. And it started on Friday. And today we created, those of you that have kids know what a Lunchable is. A Lunchable is a little prepackaged lunch, and it might have a protein in it, some cheese, some crackers, a fruit. We generated those in-house today, Lunchables. We made them from scratch. The other thing that we're moving to is more pre-prepared hot meals. One of the hot meals that's going out tomorrow for the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday feeding is a teriyaki chicken over rice that was prepared, cooked on site, packaged, and then it'd be distributed frozen with reheating instructions and safety instructions for parents. So we're changing up the menu a little bit. So some of the issues related to that certainly are that this type of food distribution is certainly more labor intensive. It requires a lot of scrutiny on refrigeration, some demands relative to packaging. Excuse me. Labeling issues, because once you're using a food product in your packaging, you have to do labeling or communication that informs the parent that they need to either refrigerate or heat to a certain temperature, and if they don't heat to a certain temperature, that food has to be discarded. So there's some work that needs to be done in order to transition to that, but in the long run, I think that providing variety for our children is important, and we're just taking the challenges as they come head on, and our staff and volunteers are continuing to do a great job. Any questions about food service?
My only question is relative to the health department. Are they pulling back restrictions relative to us doing it this way? I just know how stringent they are and on handing or pre-packaging and everything. So we're hitting their criteria. We're not going to get any blowback there.
Yeah, we're not getting any blowback from the health department, and Matt is, obviously very experienced and understands the requirements related to not only hot meal production but hot meal storage and distribution.
Right.
And we're following all those guidelines. He runs around with his little.
Yeah, and our kitchen hits the criteria, I would imagine, but it does hit the criteria.
Yes.
I know, again, same thing.
Yes.
If you have to hit certain marks.
That's why we're doing all our major food creation at the Oswego High School.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our greatest facility in terms of prep space, but it is our best facility related to cooking equipment and refrigeration and freezers. And it also has an adjacent loading dock, because after we prepare our meals, we either refrigerate or freeze them. They get loaded onto those two refrigerated trucks for storage. So the high school is really our best go-to. Right now we have food production in the high school cafeteria. We also have food production in the adjoining corridor in order to provide social distancing. And it's a well-oiled machine. Today I was thinking, if any board member would love to see what our food production looks like, if you just let me know. We do food production on Fridays and Tuesdays. I know that they would love to see a board member come in. You'll have your temperature taken, you'll be given a mask, and you can interact with staff, and you can see exactly what the magnitude of this is. It's unimaginable if you haven't seen it. I do take pictures, and I'll try to get Jamie to send some of those out to you. But if you wanted to stop in during food production day, you're welcome to do that.
Dean, financially, what is this going to cost the district in the end?
It's hard to know, but our meals, our accountability for our creation and distribution of meals is we do get reimbursed. There will be reimbursement for these meals. That's why we're really careful to count the number of meals that are created, count the number of meals that are distributed in each site and remotely. We also do delivery. We have social service agencies that might come and collect 40 lunches and breakfast, and they distribute them to families that they know that can't get to a site. We have principals and volunteers that are also doing home deliveries, and we tally those very carefully. We hope not that this isn't going to put us in the red at all.
Oh, go.
Hey, Dean, Brandon.
Yeah.
Could you put me down for Friday? I'd like to come in.
Yes.
Thank you.
And what time is that, Dean?
Brandon, when we do food, we start food production at 9 o'clock, so 10 a.m. would be the perfect time for you to come.
I'll be there. What entrance do I go to?
If you go to the back of the high school, you'll see the loading dock, and just left of the loading dock, you'll see a door.
Yep.
A staircase to a door that leads right into the cafeteria. You'll be met by 2 registered nurses that will ask you a series of protocol questions and take your temperature and give you a mask.
Sounds great.
Great.
I'll throw down on that too, Dean, if you wouldn't
Okay.
mind. Yep.
Got that, Karen? Okay, good. Today, Nancy cut about 25 pounds of boiled ham and American cheese into cubes. She got very good at it. The next is continuity of instruction. And this is one that there's been a lot of a conversation about. And I talked about it a few weeks ago when we met, and I'll talk about it again. There were 3 required reports that had to be submitted to the state education department in the eye of the storm. One was on childcare. It was submitted and approved by me. Submitted by me and approved by the state. The second one was food service. That was submitted and approved. And the third is continuity of learning. Continuity of learning is the plan that each district had to submit related to how you were engaged students and provide them with an opportunity to receive review and enhancement and enrichment materials. That report was submitted and approved. There are districts across New York State that jumped ahead, and they moved. Some of them moved directly to remote instruction. Some moved directly to requirements for students and teachers to engage during so many hours a day. Our county agreed that we would move slowly and that we would move to enrichment materials online and hard copies for students that weren't able to access online materials. And so that was phase 1. Our teachers came together with principals and directors, and they created a great resource bank that's on our district website under the main red banner. That was phase 1, online enrichment, review material, no new instruction. Then you'll notice that a few weeks ago, I communicated to staff that I had been reflecting on this, and I've been listening to feedback from parents and teachers. And teachers were hungry to reach out to their kids. And we started having a lot more conversation administratively about the social emotional needs of kids and families. So at that point, we moved into phase 2, which was the creation of new instructional enrichment materials. But at that point, we moved to class and course specific enrichment online materials and packets at grades 7 through 12. It was also at that time that I started loosening up on the restriction that I had put on teachers initially in terms of reaching out to students, because I was receiving feedback that particular secondary teachers were still reaching out to their students in classrooms and saying, don't forget, you've got this assignment due next Friday, and I'm going to grade you on that. There was to be no new instruction, no new grading, and that was creating anxiety for all types of families. And I communicated that quite clearly to teachers not to do that, but it was still happening in pockets. So I thought by loosening the restriction on teachers reaching out to students, maybe that would, help with some of that anxiety from students and teachers in terms of being connected. And then the sky was the limit after that. And I hope that some of you have been able to see some of the online, the videos and the electronic messages that have been created by teachers in schools, the electronic lessons that have been created by special area staff. So the level of engagement between teachers and students has jumped tremendously, and it's heartwarming to watch. You also received my robocall and correspondence last week about many districts now are starting to look at the possibility of a long-term closure. And what does that mean for remote learning? So we are doing a lot of groundwork now to get prepared for the what if time comes when we do go to more direct instruction, something that I'm very concerned about doing. I will resist it as long as possible because I think it puts significant burdens on families, all types of families. We get feedback all the time already from teachers because we're starting to do professional development about the Google platform and how to set up Google Classrooms and create Google slide presentations and videos for instruction. They're already overwhelmed. Can you imagine a family with 4 children or 3 children and mom and dad are working from home and they've got 2 devices and somebody's got to do biology and French and, something else, and dad's trying to use the Wi-Fi and the family computer to work remotely. So some of the things that we have been doing is, for phase 3, is to focus on what are the needs of our families should we ever move to remote learning. And so currently we're moving to a Google platform. You see that tonight. We've moved away from Zoom, and now we're using Google Meets. Google Meets has been used throughout the district over the last week for meetings and things. We have just completed the technology needs survey, which is the first step in finding out what families need. After that, we're going to use Google Classroom PD for teachers. That's happening now. And we're also creating guidance documents for students and parents so that if we move to this more remote type of teaching and online engagement with students, that the students and parents understand what that looks like. So should we move to more instruction, as you can see, it needs to be rolled out very thoughtfully for all the reasons that I outlined. And also, we have to consider technology needs. If families have Wi-Fi, which isn't a socioeconomic thing, sometimes it's a matter of where you live. Scheduling of multiple children in multiple courses, the provision of support for students with disabilities, decisions on assessment and grading. So all these things have to be decided on and laid out thoughtfully before we can ever roll out new instruction for our kids, which is not required, in a way that's fair and equitable and makes everybody feel good about what we're doing. So currently, we're looking at pass-fail for quarters 3 and 4, and to do no harm to students relative to assignments that were not handed in. I've had students reach out to me worried about making up PE. And my response to them is, you don't have to. We have started laying out our framework for what that instruction would be. And you heard in my robocall that should we move to more remote direct instruction, that would not occur before April 20th. Well, that new date now is May 4th, because there's so much groundwork to do, so many unanswered questions, and so much guidance still to be had from the state. And the continuity of instruction portal for the SED has not been opened, So there's been no requirement for me to update our plan. Our plan is still in good standing, and but we are increasing our methods and delivery of material for students. So should we go to more remote learning, it would look like K through two teachers would be focusing on 3 components, ELA math and 1 other. That other could be a special area, it could be social emotional learning. That would be through Google Slides, including 10 minutes of instruction a day. 3 through 6 would be using a Google Classroom format, and teachers would be designing recorded lessons that which children could access and then do an activity for. Again, no grading, no collection of materials. And then also some requirement for teachers in K through 6 to reach out to students at least 1 time a week in some meaningful way to make connections and engage with them the way that they have been already. And then a requirement for special education teachers to modify and provide enriching materials either remotely or in hard copy that equalizes and is attentive to that child's IEP. So you can see those are all variables that we have to think about that make this so challenging. 7 through 12 would move to further into class and course, 15 to 20 minutes a day, 2 times a week, times 7 classes. So you would see that a 7 through 12 teacher would be very heavily engaged, and the pressure that that might put on a student. Because remember something, we put new instruction in front of a 7th through 12th grader, and you don't have the teacher there with them delivering the instruction. The support of that new learning falls on the adult in the family. So that's, now I don't share that with you to overwhelm you, but it's only to share with you in an honest way that this is very challenging. This is what we spend the second half of our day after doing food service is.
So Dean, just to add to that, I've gotten several phone calls this week and messages regarding the difference between what we're doing and some other districts are doing. And I explained to them exactly what you're saying about the no new material and how we've held back a little bit on the engagement portion of it. I like the fact that we're going to be allowing the teachers to reach out more. But what is the big difference between, like, one of the parents that called said Central Square's website offers a lot more, Fulton's website does this, or why are there different things going on? And of course I don't have those answers, right? But the only thing I can do is provide them with the feedback that you've given us.
Yeah, exactly. What I can tell you is that not only do I engage with all 9 component superintendents at least twice a week, formally like this, but we also have ongoing conversations every day. I can also tell you, as I told you before, that the message from the start was that we were going to try to stay lockstep. But some people get eager, and they're feeling the pressures of certain parents to do more, do more, do more. And we've heard a tiny bit of that, but we've heard a lot more from parents and staffs that are concerned about being overwhelmed with a lot of new instruction. I know what all 9 component districts are doing in our county, and I also looked very deeply at some other districts after I got some pretty pointed feedback a few weeks ago. I looked at Beeville. I know exactly what they're doing. I looked at FM. I know exactly what they're doing. I know what Skinny Atlas is doing. I know what Saratoga is doing. And I spoke to many of those superintendents. I have their SED submissions, and they're doing the same things that we're doing. Some of them did put out they got very aggressive with every teacher, every student had to log on for 15 minutes a day per course, and their feedback was tremendous from parents. Oh my God, what are you doing? We can't manage this. Now they're starting to pull back. So I think our method of doing it more thoughtfully is the best way. It's similar to Phoenix, it's similar to Hannibal, it's similar to Fulton, it's similar to APW and Pulaski. Central Square, they got a little ahead. But I will tell you that our online resource bank is very, very similar to Syracuse City. It's very, very similar to Fulton and to Saratoga. So I get that parents reach out to you, and I appreciate you just articulating what I've tried to share with you is we're doing this thoughtfully and we're trying to not create greater gaps that already exist when you have the teacher in the classroom with the kids. Because of technology.
I've been hitting on the fact that not everybody has internet. Not everybody has the ability to sit in a room and sit in front of a teacher and ask questions, and then later on the parents be able to explain them. The ones that are reaching out are obviously the ones that feel comfortable about, you give me a lesson and I'll help my kids with it, right? That type of thing. But in general, it's a small group, right? And I think once I explained that to them and I talked to them a little bit about the equity portion of it and having everything be fair for all students, they get it. They just feel lost, right? And they feel like they're at a standstill.
Well, they're nervous, and I think some of our high-flying students are nervous too. They're worried about, what will the college think, or I didn't get to finish, my chem course, or I didn't, I get that. I can tell you that the guidance document around graduation rate and continuous instruction and graduation requirements last week was very, very helpful to us, to Carrie and to Heidi and myself, because we're going to alleviate a lot of the anxiety around that by providing every child every opportunity they can to show mastery of particular content, that they got it, in order for us to thoughtfully and honestly be able to grant credit for them. And we're looking at two new terms. One is essential learning, or evidence that it's been learned, and the other is not yet learned. It's that simple. We've had to boil it down to that. There's evidence that they've learned that essential content, or it's not yet learned because it stopped on March 16th. And if that's our criteria, evidence of learning essential material, we're going to be able to give credit to students so that they can graduate and go on to college or do the other things that they planned for. We're not going to let the coronavirus cause students to not be successful this year. We're starting to look, I guess I'll put it right out there. I know this is live streamed. We're looking at setting up an alternative graduation date in August before students take off for college. We want them to have that experience. I know that our class advisors are looking at alternatives to experiences like the prom. We're going to nail down a date at the college for an August graduation in early August. And I'm not saying that because I'm not thinking that we won't have our regular graduation, but I want to be prepared. And I want to give the students, those seniors and those senior families, some hope that we're going to have some of those traditions in a non-traditional way.
Yeah, that's great.
I appreciate you supporting that. I can tell you that the positive feedback from parents about essential learning, feeding, I hear it every day from parents and staff. I hear it when every day there's positive feedback. I've only been challenged or questioned negatively about why we're not doing more twice.
Dean, I just wanted to second that because I've actually engaged in conversations with a lot of people who have just been really grateful for us taking kind of a more cautious, slow approach, especially given the fact that up until now the state's been doing a 2-week by 2-week strategy, which is, you don't pour a lot of resources if we're going back to school, in 2 weeks. So it's really been the process that we had to do. I also think that just everybody's in the same boat. So there's a lot of stress in a lot of households. So the fact that we're not adding learning how to do online learning to it, from the get-go is very helpful. I've also seen it firsthand with college students. Annie spends 12 hours a day right in front of her screen. That's not, I mean, she's so discouraged because it's not the kind of learning that she's used to. And it's, and so I actually really, I have actually gotten a lot of feedback in the positive, like you suggested, with families just trying to deal with the day by day and not having that stress added. And also, again, everyone's in the same boat, so colleges are going to understand. Everybody, you know, understands that we're all in this together. We're all in the same situation, so there isn't going to be repercussions.
Right, right. I wanted to send it. I'm ready to wrap up now, but I wanted to give a shout out. You know, I have a teacher that lives with me, and it happens to be a teacher that works in 3 schools. And I can tell you that he's engaging with his principals every day through Google Meets or before that Zoom. So our principals are doing a really good job of holding virtual faculty meetings every day, planning special projects and engagement activities with their students. So everyone has really stepped up and done a tremendous job. As I know I've told you before, we have all principals are at feeding sites every day, and that's not really their job. And executive directors are at feeding sites every day, and that's not really their job. And I'm doing food production every day, and it's certainly not my job. But as I said in the very first week, we're all going to be asked to do things differently than we've ever done them before. And we're only going to get through this together if we work together and blur those lines and stop worrying about collective bargaining and stop worrying about how I did it before and just do what needs to be done every day. And that's what I see people doing.
I agree. And Dean, I was trying to chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard the governor say at one point in time too that all the districts have to do the same thing. Like District A can't just say, oh, we're coming back tomorrow, we're going to graduate here, when B, C, and D aren't doing the same thing, that they all have to do the same. So I think that communication piece, that is the big part that, you know, what you're doing. But I think that's the part, you're in uncharted waters, and every day is different, you know, what the cards you get dealt to you. And I think that's what I hope people understand, is that we are doing what we can. And
yes,
there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, and we're trying to do the best. Sorry, Tom. We're trying to do the best job we can too. And I'm trying to balance. You know, I had a great quote here in one of my pads. Well, first of all, we need to balance new learning opportunities with the technology needs, equality of opportunity, and parent frustration. That's important. But this was another one. Chris Todd said this to us last week in a robocall when he was saying to us, stop grading, stop new instruction. It's not the right thing to do right now. And I wrote it down, and it says, Todd, grading is an imperfect science. Currently, those of you that are grading your students are grading their home situations, not mastery of content. So we got to stop that. Everybody's home is different. And when we deliver remotely into those mobile home parks, you see it different. You see that children are all different. And we have to teach to equality. And right now we have to care for our kids the best way we can and not create new frustrations.
Yeah,
go ahead, Tom.
And I'm sorry, Dean, but I just wanted to reinforce that too. If I don't know who else, I know Sam took that webinar on Saturday from with Secretary Tahoe, and they talked about the exact same thing. You know, it's continuity of education. Every student, reaching out to every student needs to be reached. Teachers, counselors, every aspect doing that. But they also, you know, because this is a fluid situation, we are evolving through it, and that's all the way up to the top. I mean, you saw the other day when New York City schools, he said, we're going back, and the governor said, no, wait a minute, hold on, you know, because he wants to do it statewide. But the point is that they referenced in there that we may be stepping up to that next level, up to level 3, to you know, once we go up to level 3 in terms of new learning that coming down from state ed. So it's evolving not only locally, but on the state platform as well.
Yeah, and we're trying to stay ahead of that because we're getting guidance from SED.
Right.
And you heard me reference phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Right.
What we're doing right now is we're laying the groundwork to be prepared for phase 3, if and when they say, Now you must do remote new instruction.
Right.
I know Carrie and Heidi were certainly very concerned about that April 20th date that I put out there, that if should we, and now that that's pushed back to
May 4th.
the new date.
Yeah.
I'm tired. The new May 4th. That's a big relief because we want to do it right. Today I saw a distribution by City BOCES. City BOCES did a distribution today to every child that's in an alternative ed program or in a CPE program who didn't have technology. Those students were given a Chromebook today from BOCES. Now we'll overlay that list of students over our list of students who don't have technology. So that lightens our load. So Jamie's now calculating the number of students that, 1, don't have a device in the home, and 2, don't have access to Wi-Fi. That's a much more challenging issue. But so these are the things that we're working on, plus the budget. Other than that, I got nothing.
Dean, before you break up, I got 2 things. Out of that webinar on Saturday, also came, a lot of people have been asking me about the school construction of our capital project, when and if that's going to get going. And what came out of it, I guess, from Dan, I can't remember his last name, but he said that it was okay that we were all school construction was considered essential, but safeguards had to be in place, the social distancing, masks, and all that stuff. So I guess we're okay to go as far as the construction project. The other thing is Heather sent out a text yesterday about the budget, the BOCES budget vote on April 23rd, possibly. But now with Nisbin and the other groups talking about not approving our budget till after April 30th, does that mean that they'll postpone the BOCES budget too, the city budget?
We haven't been given any indication of that. And I know that's something that Karen's going to, and Heather want to talk about next when I'm finished, is that right now we currently have a required meeting on the 23rd in order to adopt the BOCES budget. We also have our regular board meeting, which will have resolutions largely in the personnel area on the 21st, and whether or not you want to try to do this twice in a week, or just meet on the 23rd instead of the 21st. Not trying to steal Karen's thunder, but
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Dean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, before we go on that, on the construction part of things, there was that, the guidance document, because they spoke about this weekend, and there's also a printout on it, referring to talking to your insurance companies and then just being very mindful of what we talked about in the facilities commission, the optics of it. And, you know, in terms of making sure that every aspect, and this is a reference document, I don't know if you've got it or not, but I can send it on to you, but it talks about just making sure that we've talked to like insurance companies and everything to make sure that we're covered all the way around.
Yeah, that and we're fortunate enough, Peter with Construction Associates, it's so good, so detailed in terms of how things look, perception, social distancing requirements, the need for our vendors and contractors to adhere to all the regulations related to the health department and things like that as they move forward.
And Tom, all of our contracts have been vetted by both our insurance company and Tom Buckle.
I'm Buckle. Great. I was just want to make sure. All right.
Okay. Heather, do you want to wrap up that conversation?
Yeah, are you shutting down, or are you going to stay?
I'm going to jump out as soon as our regular business is done, because I know your next meeting is not through Google, it's through a phone call, but I'm going home.
We need to do. I just want to say thank you, and please extend our thanks to Matt and all the faculty and staff who are just really pinch hitting and working hard, and it's just incredibly appreciated. We know you guys are doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
And on to Karen's.
Next week, it is required on April 23rd, the City BOCES budget vote and board member vote. It is still required. So I was asking the board what they would like to do next week, because we do have a regular scheduled meeting on Tuesday and then the special meeting on Thursday. Did not know if you wanted to have both meetings, if you would like to consolidate and have it on Thursday, whichever you would like to do.
Okay, so I guess we're looking for feedback from the rest of the
Hear them,
board.
you turn me off.
Consolidate.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Can we consolidate? In which way would we have to go? We'd have to go to theirs on the Thursday?
It's held here. We'll have a regular meeting just like this, and I have all the information that I'll email you tomorrow. And what it is we just hold the vote for the budget, and we would hold the vote to approve the 3 board members that they are recommending.
Yeah,
So
I was.
it's not through BOCES, it's our meeting.
It's our meeting, but
I agree
that
to
night.
consolidate.
One meeting's good for me.
So Thursday would be okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
Same time, 5 o'clock?
Sure.
It's not like I can go anywhere.
Thank you. Next, would the board like to move to an executive session?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have just one more question for the board. You have 2 options relative to agenda review. We could set up a Google Meets like this on Friday morning, and we could have Cabinet and Karen can be here available, and we could do, personnel at 9, finance at 9:10, and instruction at 9:20, and then you could just pop into your committee if you'd like to do agenda review that way. Or we could just forego agenda review while we're doing this stuff. It's up to you.
Well, this would be, if we did that, I'd be able to make the meetings.
Yeah, you're available during the day.
I'm available during the day, so I'd be interested if we wanted to continue with our committee meetings, I'd be super stoked with being able to be a part of them now.
Anybody else?
My only concern is on Friday, we coming
Friday,
down
we're going to do food.
Right.
Food.
this Friday. I mean, it doesn't have to. We could do the
We
following
can do
Friday.
agenda review on Monday since our meeting's not till Thursday.
Correct.
That works. That
Yeah, I'm good
works.
with
Okay, so Karen will put out is that okay, Heather?
Yeah, that works for me.
So let's do agenda review. She'll put out a schedule and a Google Meets invite.
Yes.
Can I just interject a reminder that for Monday, we would maybe have to do it later in the afternoon because we're at the meal distribution sites in the morning?
What
We'll
about
find
Tuesday?
You're welcome to join us whenever.
Yep.
Usually we're at we do food distribution between 8 and noon. Then we have a debrief at noon. So maybe we could do agenda review at 12:30.
Okay, and I'll put in,
Pick another morning because I think that once it gets into the afternoon, it gets a little complicated with
Well,
other.
Tuesday is food production again. But I guess if we did it at 9, we could do it 9 o'clock on Tuesday, and then we would run over to the food production. They'd start without us. Want to do Monday at 9? Tuesday at 9?
at 9.
Tuesday at 9. Tuesday at 9
Tuesday at
works for me.
And I'll put an email out tomorrow.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right.
At this time, would the board like to move to executive session?
Yes.
In reason?
Discussion of personnel.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And would there be a vote needed after executive session?
No, so we will close the meeting down.
Okay, and could I have a motion to move to executive session?
Make a motion.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Make a motion. Brandon.
Did you already do that, Karen?
I think we just did that.
I'm sorry.
It's been a long day.
You may adjourn to executive session.